So I will be talking about the United States Constitution, First Amendment, and the first clause of it, the free exercise of religion. So to start with, the First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So when I use brown text, that's a direct quote from the document. So the First Amendment protects 5 different freedoms. First, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government to correct grievances. So today we'll talk about freedom of religion. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So the historical context, first of all, the founders wanted to avoid having a national religion, so which was standard practice in Europe in that day. England was Anglican, France and Spain were Catholic, various Germanic states were either Lutheran or Catholic, Russia was Russian Orthodox, etc. Every country had its approved and religion. So that was the standard in Europe, but the founding fathers didn't want to establish a national religion. They wanted people to be free to exercise whatever they felt was the right way to worship God. So you did have some states that were endorsing a particular Christian sect, but the idea of religious freedom was spreading since so many settlers in America had come here for religious freedom. So in 1620, the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and they were seeking a new life where they could freely worship God as they believed they should. And the Pilgrims wanted to be separate from the Church of England. So because of that, they had been persecuted and had to flee, and so they ended up sailing to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and starting a new colony. In the 1630s, the Puritans, who wanted to purify the Church of England rather than separate from it, they wanted to purify it from non-scriptural elements. And they started moving to Massachusetts also to escape religious persecution. This was called the Great Migration. So throughout the 1630s, many Puritans came over to Massachusetts. In 1649, Maryland had passed the Religious Toleration Act, in which various Christian denominations were allowed. It was still intolerant of people who were not Christian, but at least within Christianity, it allowed a diversity of belief to be permitted, which was a step towards allowing religious toleration. In 1663, Rhode Island's new royal charter grants it permission to hold forth a lively experiment that a most flourishing civil state may stand and best be maintained, and that among our English subjects with the full liberty in religious concernments. So Rhode Island was probably the first colony to allow a general freedom of religion, and even beyond just Christian sects, it allowed like Jewish faith to flourish as well. So in 1787, the U.S. Constitution states in Article 6 that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So here we clearly see that the founders, as they wrote our Constitution, were not wanting to require any religious test or require anyone to belong to any particular religion in order to hold an office of the United States. And that same summer, in 1787, the Northwest Ordinance was passed, which organized the settling of what we now call the Midwest. At the time, it was in the northwestern part of the country, but now we call it the Midwest. It states, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. So this was, this ordinance would grant a tract of land for the purpose of encouraging education. So they would grant land, and some of it could be sold to establish a school. Another part of that land, the school could be built on it. But they were specifically encouraging education, and So they said religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. They wanted to establish schools for these reasons. So grants to religious schools were allowed under this ordinance until 1845. So they were certainly not prohibiting religion, they were encouraging it. Washington, in his farewell address, says, "And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." So Washington here is saying that it's foolish, basically, to suspect that you can maintain morality without religion. He says our reason and our experience both tell us that to have national morality, we have to have a religious people. So people have to be constrained by their belief in a higher being in order to maintain their national morality or their personal morality as well. John Adams says, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." So both Washington and Adams and our other founding fathers, at the time the Bill of Rights was written, they were not trying to remove religion from public life. To the contrary, they were encouraging its practice by freeing it from government interference. They thought that the best way to encourage people to wholeheartedly and of their own free will to practice their religion, they felt that it couldn't be subject to government interference, that to act according to your conscience, how you believe God should be worshipped and how you should behave, that you needed to be free of government interference. So the modern interpretation of this establishment clause, the establishment clause is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So in 1802, President Thomas Jefferson wrote a reply to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Association, which says that the First Amendment builds a wall of separation between church and state. So that was in 1802. Much later, in 1879, the Supreme Court quoted that phrase in the case Reynolds versus the United States, which prohibited polygamy by Mormons. The Mormons had gone, because of persecution, had gone out to Utah eventually and started their settlements there. And when they were wanting to become a state, there was an issue because at the time they believed polygamy was proper. They've since changed their views on that, but at the time they believed polygamy was proper. So this case came before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, calling this phrase from Thomas Jefferson, "built a wall of separation between church and state," quoted that phrase in deciding that polygamy was prohibited. And in 1947, in the case Everson versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court again used this Jefferson's metaphor and said that wall of separation must be kept high and impregnable. So, and other cases since then have generally followed this separationist view. So, although that didn't at all appear to be the view of the founders, the Supreme Court since 1947 and onward has often chosen to take this separationist view that there has to be a strict separation, a high and impregnable wall of separation between church and state. But court rulings have not always been consistent with each other either. So sometimes they've differed in what they think the separation should be. Justice Rehnquist challenged the separationist view in his dissent to Wallace versus Jaffrey in 1985, which was a case about from Alabama allowing a minute of meditation and voluntary prayer at the beginning of the school day. And Rehnquist's argument was that this establishment clause only prohibited denominational preference, choosing one denomination or one religion over another, not that it prohibited any religion in public life. So that was a challenge to this separationist view. Yeah. Okay, so the free exercise clause. So it reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that second part, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, is the free exercise clause. So there are several aspects regarding the free exercise of religion. You have belief versus conduct, discriminatory versus generally applicable laws, institutional free exercise and internal versus outward acts, and religion versus secular conscience, and also prohibiting versus burdening. So we'll look at each of these. So belief versus conduct. Does our freedom only include the right to believe or to the right to act upon those beliefs as well? So Jefferson's famous letter again to the Danbury Baptist states the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, and man has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. So Jefferson's argument seems to be that the government can't tell you what to think, but it can govern your actions. So that's a more narrow view of this this free exercise clause, that you can believe as you want, but your actions can be controlled by the government. However, other founders took a broader view of this. James Madison said, religion includes the manner of discharging duties to God. So the manner of discharging is what you're doing about your duties to God, how you act, not just what you believe. William Penn, who founded Pennsylvania with the basis of religious freedom, states, liberty of conscience means not only a mere liberty of the mind, believing or disbelieving, but the exercise of ourselves in a visible way of worship. So again, your beliefs lead to actions, and those actions also need to be protected. And book of James, chapter 2, 24 and 26 say, you see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. As a body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. So as James is explaining, your faith, if you have real faith, it will manifest itself in deeds. Your faith will needs to be lived out in your life to be a real faith. I mean, if it's only inside, he said it's dead if it's not also affecting your life and what you're doing in life. So this argues for a broader view of the free exercise clause, that it should not be just what you're thinking inside, but what you're doing with your life because of that belief. Another area of controversy in this free exercise is discriminatory versus generally applicable laws. So our laws are only laws which are specifically targeting religion prohibited, or religious exemptions to general laws to be allowed. So looking back at history, by 1789, almost all states allowed Quakers to testify or vote by affirmation rather than by oath, because Matthew 5:34 through 7 says, do not take an oath, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So Quakers from that verse said, it's wrong to take an oath. The Bible says we shouldn't. So they were allowed to affirm rather than take an oath. I swear, but I affirm that something. So there were allowances made for Quakers to not take an oath, but instead to affirm. And also several states exempted both Quakers and Mennonites from service in the militia. So there were already religious exemptions to generally applicable laws, saying everyone must take an oath before they testify in court, or everyone must serve in the militia. So they made religious exemptions then. John Locke, who was an influential philosopher for the Founding Fathers, argued for separation between civil government being in charge of worldly matters and the church in charge of spiritual matters. So by his arguments, maybe you'd say that worldly things, laws involving worldly issues, shouldn't have spiritual exemptions. But James Madison argues that duty to the Creator is precedent both in order of time and in degree of obligation to claims of civil society. Thus, everyone who joins a civil society must do it with the saving of his allegiance to the universal sovereign. So he's saying God was there first, and we owe a higher degree of obligation to God than to civil society. So we must reserve our allegiance to God, put our allegiance to God above our allegiance to civil society. So the court has allowed exemptions for things like compulsory schooling and working on the Sabbath, but they denied it for things like peyote use in certain American Indian religions for being against drug laws. So do secular exemptions to certain laws mean religious exemptions must also be allowed? For example, police officers not wearing beards. Should there be an exemption if your religion calls to wear a beard, like some Muslims? Or requiring abortion to be provided in employer-provided health care? Is that, there are secular exemptions, so there are arguments that you should also allow a religious exemption for that. Or on animal sacrifice, if your religion requires animal sacrifice. So there's a lot of issues that come up as a result of this. Do laws which generally apply have any religious exemptions? So in 1993, Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in response to a Supreme Court decision in 1990 about the peyote that I mentioned, where the court disallowed use of peyote, which was used for American Indian religious act of worship. How about institutional free exercise? Does a church have control over its leadership and employees? So we have a millennium of conflict over appointment of bishops and etc. Does the Pope or the King appoint them, or it's kind of a power struggle issue. Early Protestants would often enlist civil authorities in their struggle with the Catholic Church. But the Founding Fathers rejected the English model where the king and the parliament were in charge of the Anglican Church. The king was the head of the church, and the parliament approved the Book of Common Prayer and the tenets of the Anglican religion. So the Founding Fathers were very familiar with that and completely rejected that. They said, no, the government should not have authority over the church. So then the question comes, is the church subject to employment laws, such as anti-discrimination, etc.? And the court has generally ruled that no, the church has the right to decide who it's employing as its ministers and has the right to fire them based on their own beliefs, not with government intervention. And does this extend to religious but non-church institutions, such as schools and hospitals and social service agencies run by religious groups, or businesses run by religious individuals? So this is another area of controversy in this. You also have religious versus secular conscience. Do religious exemptions also apply to secular beliefs which are strongly held? During the Vietnam era, draft exemptions were allowed for people with a strong conviction against military service, even though it was not based on a religious belief. But this exemption has not been extended to all cases. Also, prohibiting versus burdening. Does prohibiting mean only fines and imprisonment, or can it also mean withholding an important benefit? In Sherbert versus Verner, 1963, the Supreme Court ruled that withholding unemployment benefits because the Seventh-day Adventist refused a job which required work on Saturdays was a violation of their First Amendment rights. So, in conclusion, one of the great American contributions to the world is the free exercise of religion, both as a constitutional principle and a reality in society. America was one of the first, or the first, nation to really allow free exercise of religion among its people, and this has become often accepted throughout the world. And there's still many exceptions, but many countries have since accepted this. But this is really a great contribution of America to the world. But arguments over this right have also changed over time. At times the court has deviated from the original meanings, and sometimes various court decisions are inconsistent with each other. So there are still many issues that are debated under this establishment and free exercise clause. So an ongoing source of court decisions and new cases. So hopefully this has gotten you thinking more about what does establishment of religion and free exercise mean. Thank you.
Because the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that